All right. So today's episode is entitled, um, But She's My Mother. And I don't have any notes, so I can't, I might ramble a little bit because I have absolutely no notes written down on this one at all. But my mom, um, I was basically a caregiver for early on, very early on. And I was a caregiver for her in different forms. So this is what I mean by that. So my brother, my biological brother, the other child that my mother had, he would be considered um, a half brother because we share the same mother but not the same father. So he was born just before I turned 6. And I helped my mother take care of him. Even at the ripe old age of 6, I helped her take care of him. And that leads me to being the caregiver for my brother. But no, I helped her take care of him. So, I did what the other little kids would do as the older sibling to the younger sibling. I would help with getting the diapers and making sure he had a bottle, going to get a bottle. Or if I needed to get some wipes or a rag or something to help bathe him, I would do that. I would do those things for her from the start. But then as we got older, and he entered preschool, I started taking him to school before I would go to school. So again, that's one of those things that, older siblings do for younger siblings when you are in school very near where you live. So yeah, again, caregiver for him. But in a way, it was being a caregiver for my mom because it allowed me to do some of the things that she was not able to do because she was either at work or in school. But then as we got older, she became involved in drugs and alcohol. Now, she was already involved in alcohol because my brother's father was an alcoholic. So she was already involved in alcohol. She was already drinking with him. But then in between ending her relationship with him and starting up a new relationship with my stepdad, she got involved with a couple of women that, and I'm sorry if you're watching this, then you see that I keep turning my head because I'm looking at my puppy. As I said, my puppy broke her leg a few days ago. It's been almost a week at this point, so I'm just making sure she's okay. So anyway, my mom got involved with drugs in between my brother's dad and my stepdad. And I say it that way because my mother never married my brother's dad. However, she did marry the man that I call my stepdad. So in between there, she connected with a couple of women in the building that we were living in, and they were, into smoking weed. Most everyone was into smoking weed at that point. So they were into smoking weed, but then these women were into doing a little bit more than weed. And I can't say that it's their fault that my mom got involved because she more than likely had seen it being done somewhere else. But whatever the case, she began her venture into harder drugs, harder than weed. So she went from alcohol to weed to snorting coke to smoking crack to alcohol to meth. And I think at some point she did get back to crack and then she went back to meth, but alcohol was always there. Alcohol was always there. Even when she stopped drinking and she was going to her AA meetings, alcohol still played a role in her life because she had never really figured out how to 100% let anything go. She would let it go for a month and then come right back to it. Or she would let it go for a couple of months and then she'd come right back to it. Or she let it go for, I think the longest that she was ever sober, 100% ever sober, was somewhere between 6 and 9 months. But then she came back to it, depending on what was going on in her life. So when I realized that my mom was not just an alcoholic, but also a drug addict, I knew that there were things that I had to take care of for her. So at one point, while I started working at 14 through a summer program that the city of Chicago had for kids at that time. I think they still have it, but I'm not 100% sure. But it was a summer program that they had pulled together for children, teenagers, to get their feet wet in the workforce. So after I got that experience with working that summer, that fall, right after I turned 15, that winter actually, I started looking for work elsewhere so that I could still have money coming in. And I worked for a grocery store in the neighborhood, and my paycheck went to the household. I had really no money for myself. My paycheck went to the household. So I would help pay the bills. I would help pay my brother's, well, I actually paid my brother's tuition because at the time he was at a parochial school, and he had tuition. And although it was reduced, it was still tuition. Nonetheless, it still had to be paid. It still had to be paid. So my pay would go towards that, the bills and his tuition. And then at one point in time, I was always cleaning the house. That was never a question. I was always cleaning the house. My mother trained us early on to get up on Saturday mornings and clean the house, to keep our rooms clean, to wash the dishes, to do laundry, things of that nature. And at one point in time, my mom was so gone on drugs that I did everything. I did absolutely everything. I would wake my brother up in the morning. I would make sure that he went to school. That's before he dropped out. I would go to his school meetings, the parent-teacher conferences, when my brother was diagnosed it was a learning disability. He, of course, had ADD, but there was another disability that kind of slowed down his cognitive processes. So he was behind in his learning, and there were a ton of meetings around all of that. And I went to those meetings because my mom was so into her addiction that she wasn't there for that. And then she and my stepdad at some point divorced before I got to high school. And them being together just further exacerbated her addiction. Because my stepdad, although he worked a regular job, he also was a singer. And being a singer, he was in a group. He never really sung solo that I know of. He was in a group of 5 or 6 guys. And all of those guys, the good portion of those guys, were also alcoholics or drug addicts of some sort. My stepdad was more of a drinker. He wasn't into drugs at all. He was more of a drinker. He wouldn't even smoke weed, at least not that I know of. And then my mom just got more and more involved in the drinking and the drugs. And one of her best friends that she gained through my stepdad being a part of the group was married to one of the other singers, and she eventually at some point got into drugs as well, but not as deep as my mom did. It just got so crazy. My life was just so insanely crazy and unstable and all over the place. And even though we didn't move from place to place to place on a regular basis, like for a good portion of my mom and my stepdad's marriage, we lived in this 3-bedroom apartment that was a decent apartment. It was in a decent neighborhood. It was not far from my grandparents. It was a decent neighborhood. And we lived there for a couple of years. And then we moved into this high-rise building, which my stepdad called the projects. It wasn't it wasn't the projects, but it was a high-rise building, so he called it the projects. So we moved into this high-rise building right before I graduated grammar school. So when I graduated 8th grade, we were living in that building, and then we stayed there on throughout, or just before I graduated high school, actually. So 4 years. We were there from the beginning of summer at the end of the school year, with me going from 8th grade to high school, to the beginning of summer, the end of the school year, me going right before I graduated high school. So from high school to college. So we were there for 4 years, and then we moved into, at this point, my grandparents owned a 2-flat with a basement unit, so we all moved into their building in the basement. And at this point, so much had happened in my life that by the time we got there, I was so indifferent to my mother and her needs and her addictions and the people that she was around, and the things that were going on, and that life in general. And I won't go into great detail about it all, but I will say this. So at some point, after my mom divorced my stepdad, she got deeper into drugs. So I, again, was the one doing all of this stuff. I was doing the cooking, I was doing the cleaning, I was paying the bills, I was making sure that there were groceries in the house. If I had to go to get some kind of state benefits, I would do that. Sometimes she would do that just to make sure there was food in the house and we couldn't be taken by the state. But for the most part, I was the one taking care of everything. There were days where we wouldn't know where she was because she was off getting high somewhere, with one of her friends or one of our relatives, because we had other relatives that were heavy into the drug game, not just using but also selling. And then she connected with a drug dealer in the building that we lived in, and he became her dealer and also her lover. And that was one of the most difficult times in my life, as her daughter, but also as the one that took care of the household and basically her and my brother. Because at one point during that time, and I won't go into a whole lot of detail with this one because that's a totally different story, and actually that's in my book. This particular story is in my book, Book of Testimonies, Faith at Work. But at one point, there were legal situations going on. I'll leave it at that. There was a legal situation going on, and it was really bad. And right after that happened, we had another legal situation pop up where the police actually raided the apartment. And it just so happened that I wasn't there when they raided. I had literally just left the apartment when they raided the apartment. And that actually... so that led us from leaving the building that we were living in, the high rise that my stepdad used to call the projects, leaving that building and moving into my grandparents' basement apartment in their 2-flat. And at this point, it was right before I was graduating high school, so I was trying to prepare for all of that. I had missed some time out of school because of what had happened the year before, the summer between my junior and my senior year. I had missed some time out of school because I was dealing with the legal stuff that was going on because of what happened during that summer. So I was really just pressed to finish high school and get the hell away from my mother. And again, still her caregiver, still making sure that all of the things that she needed to have done were done, taking care of the household, making sure the bills were paid, still trying to be a teenager. So much of my teenage life I don't remember because I wasn't being a teenager, I was being an adult. So much of my teenage life doesn't even, it's back here in the back of my head somewhere, or it was kicked out altogether. I don't know, but a lot of my teenage years, I don't remember. There are people that I have encountered at our high school reunions, and I'm like, yeah, I'm so-and-so, and blah, 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 and we had this class, and we used to do this, and I don't remember them at all. Because I was so focused on taking care of my mother and the needs that we had as a whole, because she wasn't doing it. And then I did get away to school. I got away to school, and I initially started out at a city college, and then went to a four-year college, and then came back from the four-year college to go back to a city college because I found out that I was pregnant. So that turned things into something totally crazy. But that's another piece of this whole me being a caregiver situation. So let's fast forward to my mother getting to a point in her life where she said that she wanted to get her life together. But she was still a drug addict. She was still an alcoholic. She was still not doing the things that she needed to do to stay on the right track. She was actually going to AA meetings. She was an avid AA meeting person, but she was still doing all the things that she wasn't supposed to be doing, even while in AA. And then at some point, she was diagnosed with cancer. And for a very long time, I wasn't sure if I believed her, because my mother had the tendency to lie about things so that people would not look at her in a negative way. So she had lied about her addiction for so very long. You know, she would say that she was clean when in actuality she wasn't. She would lie about just everything. She would just lie about stuff. She at one point had become a thief, and she was stealing stuff and pawning it. And like my wedding ring, my first wedding ring, half of it is gone because she stole it and pawned it. I allowed her to live with us at one point in time, and that's when she stole the ring, and I just couldn't deal with it anymore. This is when I really perfected loving someone from a distance, because even though I did not like the things that my mother was doing, she was my mother. She was my mother. So I still dealt with her, but we got to a point where I had to finally put my foot down and say, look, you've got to leave my house. You've got to leave me and my children. I want nothing to do with you until you start getting yourself together. And I'm okay with that. And again, she is how I perfected loving someone from a distance, because I did have to do that. I did have to push her out of my life for a very long time before I could say, okay, she can come back. Not necessarily come back and live with me, not necessarily come back and be in my house, you know, quite often, visiting me on a regular basis, but she can come back as in my children missed her, she missed my children, and I mean, she's my mother. I wanted her to be well. I wanted her to be healthy. I wanted her to be clean. And as much as I wanted all those things for her, I couldn't want them enough for her to actually do them. So I had to learn to accept who she was, as she was, and deal with it in a different way. So like I said, at one point she was diagnosed with cancer, but what I was trying to get to before I got back into that was, so at one point she was actually a caregiver for a family member, and she was so poor at it at one point that they basically told her that they didn't want her to do it anymore because she wasn't clean. She was still drinking and she was still using drugs. And they kept calling me to tell me about it because they knew I had the level head, but at the same time, you know, what am I going to do? She's a grown woman. So I had a conversation with her about the conversation that I had with the other family members. And this is when she divulged to me that she had cancer, a form of stomach cancer. So, like I said, for a while I didn't believe it, and had to really process it because, again, she lied about everything. And I don't remember what quite turned, what quite clicked in my head for me to say finally, oh, she does have it. But something must have in order for it to click and me to say yeah and accept that she had it. I do remember at one point telling her that I wanted to go to the doctor's visits with her so that I could get a better understanding of what kind of cancer she had and what she needed to do and what, you know, what they thought would happen. And she didn't want me to go. And then I started thinking, okay, well, maybe she doesn't have it because she doesn't want me to go. So because she was so adamant about me not going to her doctor's appointments, I started thinking once again that maybe she didn't have cancer. But then I think what happened was I had gone to her apartment once, or I had seen some medication or something, and realized that some of the medication was to like treat certain symptoms, not necessarily was it a like chemo medication, but it was more like treating some of the symptoms of having the type of cancer that she had, such as the pain and discomfort. So then I started thinking, okay, so maybe she really do have it. So that, on top of the alcohol, on top of the drugs, her health just began to decline more and more and more and more. And believe it or not, the kind of cancer that she told me she had, typically people don't live very long with it. As a matter of fact, the husband and I had a friend who had a very similar type of cancer, and within just over a year, I want to say, might have been 8 years, within a year, he had passed away. And we were devastated by that because we really wanted him to make it because he was our age. But anyway, so the cancer, the addictions with the drugs and the alcohol, mainly the alcohol at this point, all of that finally led to her developing cirrhosis of the liver, and that just sent her health on a massive decline. And it's so funny because the roles have reversed. She's the mother and I'm the child. However, for the very longest time, I was the mother and she was the child. And we got to a point where she actually used to call me mama, or tell people, well, you know, she's mama, so I gotta listen to what she says, or I gotta do what she's telling me to do because, you know, she's mama. And I used to think that that was hilarious. So anyway, like shortly before she passed away, probably like 3 to 6 months before she passed away, I noticed that her skin had changed. No, before I tell you about this. So we're dealing with, like I said, her cancer, her addiction to the drugs and to the alcohol, the developing of the cirrhosis of the liver. And then I get a call from her one day, and she's telling me that now the doctors are telling her that she also has hepatitis B, which, if you're not familiar with that, it is a really unfortunate illness. I'm trying to actually look it up. C. I'm sorry. I'm tired. It's late and I need to go to bed. Hepatitis C. She had developed hepatitis C. And so we are, and the cancer isn't even a conversation anymore, because now we're talking about all of the other things that are going on. The cirrhosis of the liver. She actually told me she had hepatitis C, and the cirrhosis of the liver developed after that. That's what it was. I get the call that she has hepatitis C, and then I talked to her, one, about the stomach cancer, because that's the type of cancer she had, was stomach cancer. And I've been talking to her about that and what she needed to do to get better, not necessarily better, but to be able to better deal with it, and what could have caused it. And then I get the call that, she's got the hepatitis C. And then we're talking about, okay, so now the risks of the hepatitis C is cirrhosis of the liver, which you are highly prone to because you're also an alcoholic. And then the cirrhosis of the liver does develop. So we're dealing with all of these things, and I noticed like 3 to 6 months before she passed away, probably more like 6 months before she passed away. No, 3 months before she passed away. And I remember that for a specific reason. I'll tell you why in a moment. I noticed that her skin was looking like it needed a really good cleansing, like she needed a facial of some sort. So I told her what she could use to cleanse her face, because my skin is actually typically pretty clear. And there were certain things that I did in addition to drinking more water to keep my skin clear. So I'm telling her what she needs to do. I'm giving her cleansers to use, and it never really clears up. Now, one of the things that I did not realize is that one of the side effects of cirrhosis of the liver is poor skin, because it's breaking down or not breaking down or cleansing out properly some of the toxins in your body that need to be cleansed. So that stuff starts developing in other ways and showing up in other ways. So that was the issue. Her cirrhosis of the liver had caused her skin to like break out and look really ruddy and dirty. And it didn't matter what I did to help her with it. It never changed. So the reason that I remember when it was is because, like I said, our friend passed away. And the day of our friend's funeral, my grandfather went into the hospital. And that was in September. And that's when I started noticing her face. And my mom passed in December. So 3 to 4 months is when I noticed her skin. So I had been her caretaker, her caregiver through having my brother and caring for him. I had been her caregiver through all of her addictions, through all of the men that she had gone through the things that had happened to me because of her lifestyle at that moment. I taking care of her through the cancer, through the money issues, through the being homeless, because when she lived on my sofa, she was homeless. Through, again, the addictions, through the hepatitis C, the cirrhosis, the skin issues, and then finally through her death. I had to do a fundraiser in order to funeralize her because she gave me the payment for her insurance, and I thought it was a current payment. I didn't think anything of it. I just mailed it out. And it turns out that it wasn't a current payment. And I kind of mentioned that in my previous episode when I talk about my dad and getting him life insurance and making sure that I paid it because I didn't want the same situation to happen. So yes, I mailed out the payment, and it turns out that it wasn't a current payment. It just caught her up to the period before, the quarter before. It wasn't a current payment. So when she passed away, I had to do the fundraiser to raise money to funeralize her. And what we ended up doing was having like not necessarily a memorial service, but it was a true funeral. Like she was there, her body was there. But then we cremated her afterwards because that's what we could afford to do. So I was her caregiver. So I've been a caregiver for my dad. I've been a caregiver for my mom. I am a caregiver for my husband, for my puppy. And we're going to talk in probably the next episode, how I was a caregiver for my grandparents. And then another for my children, then another for my ex-husband, and then another for my current husband, and eventually myself. And then I'm going to sum it all up, and that's probably going to be the longer of the episodes, is when I sum everything up. And then I won't say final episode because who knows what will happen after this. But another episode will be talking about how all of this will end for me as far as being a caregiver is concerned. What that looks like to me in my mind, how it will end. So yeah, I was a caregiver for my mom. But she was my mom, so I did what I had to do as her daughter. There is a scripture that talks about honoring thy mother and thy father, and this is how I do it. This is how I do it, and it's because I'm guessing that because I'm the most reliable of, I guess, everyone that they know. I don't know. I don't know how I got this assignment, but it's not an assignment that I wanted. And we'll talk about that more later. But yeah, so that's it. I'll see you guys in the next one.